Hello again, and God be with you. You may remember when Jesus first wanted to start to recruit his apostles, he went to the Lake of Galilee and spoke to some fishermen there who hadn't been able to catch any fish all night. And he helped them catch a great quantity of fish, after which they decided they were going to be Jesus' disciples and start to follow him. Have you ever wondered what happened to the fish? Let's have a look at the story in here. Bob Hartman's New Testament tells the story called Sonny's version. Abraham ben Abraham hated cats. This was not unusual for his time. In the first century in Galilee, which was when and where Abraham ben Abraham lived, everybody hated cats. They didn't curl up on people's cushions. They didn't get fed from brightly coloured bowls, and nobody kept them as pets. They got ignored, or shouted at, or kicked across the street, and that was by people who simply didn't like them, not by people like Abraham ben Abraham, who despised their very existence. The reason that Abraham ben Abraham hated cats, along with his father and his father's father, who were all called Abraham ben Abraham, is that he was a fisherman. And for a fisherman, fish equals profit. The more fish, the more profit. The fewer fish, the less profit. And because cats eat fish and have no qualms about pinching them from the nets of hard-working fishermen, fish plus cat equals less profit. So Abraham ben Abraham hated cats. Abraham ben Abraham had a son called Sonny. It was officially, of course, Abraham ben Abraham, but because Ben means son of, Sonny thought that Sonny would make a nice nickname and that he would also annoy his father. Annoying his father was not Sonny's only goal in life, but it was at the top of the list. At position number one, actually. He was 11, nearly a man by the standards of the day, and determined not to be ruled by his father's expectations. It will therefore come as no surprise that the number two goal in Sonny's life was to have a cat. A particular cat, as it happens, a scruffy, thin, ginger cat with a tail shaped like a question mark. A cat called Pat. Sonny didn't know that this was the cat's name, of course, because in first century Galilee nobody called cats names. Well, they did. They called them names like "Get lost!" or "Go away!" or "Thieving little swine!" Which is why the cats came up with names of their own. Nicer names on the whole. Names like Tickle or Scratch, Pat. And so it was that one foggy morning, Abraham ben Abraham and Sonny and Pat, the cat, made their way, each in his own way, to a fishing boat moored at the Sea of Galilee. Abraham ben Abraham's way could be described as completely cheesed off with the world. On this particular morning, Abraham ben Abraham was completely cheesed off with his chief competitors, a pair of brothers called James and John ben Zebedee. "Flippin' unfair advantage," he muttered. "Blinking luck," he grumbled. Sonny had heard it all before and had managed to work out that it had to do with the brothers sharing a rather nice boat with their father, the Zebedee bit of Ben Zebedee. He couldn't have cared less, as it happens, which was his way, and he managed to look as uninterested as possible whenever his father's rants grew loudest, which annoyed Abraham ben Abraham no end. Pat's way was to sniff around fishing boats, which was what he was doing as Abraham ben Abraham and Sonny arrived. "Get lost, you thieving little swine!" shouted Abraham ben Abraham, using what the cat assumed were the man's first and last names for him. So he did, straightening his tail into an exclamation mark and scampering away. Abraham ben Abraham climbed into the boat and set about doing a variety of setting to sea tasks. Sonny wasn't much interested in such things, but seeing as his survival depended on knowing what to do in a boat, he forced himself to pay attention. There was some business about the mast and the sail and the oars and the nets, which were inevitably tangled. So it fell to him to untangle them, which gave him the opportunity to drag them off the boat and onto the shore, which meant that he could look for Pat. This, as it turned out, was not difficult. Not nearly as difficult as straightening out a tangled net at any rate. Pat was hiding under the edge of the boat, and when Sonny reached into the bag that he carried around his neck and produced a fish head, Pat's tail and whiskers and taste buds rose to attention. So Sonny laid the fish head beside the net he was straightening. Abraham ben Abraham carried on with his set for seafaring tasks. Pat the cat matched the question mark on his head to the question mark shape that was now his tail and slowly crept out from under the boat towards the tasty fishy treat. And everyone else launched their boats into the sea and set sail. And that included James and John, the sons of Zebedee. "Blast!" shouted Abraham ben Abraham when he caught sight of the brothers' boat. Then he shouted again, "Where's that flipping net?" "Right here," Sonny shouted back, dragging it in its newly untangled state onto the boat. "They've got a head start," he fumed. "Let's get a move on." So they did. All that morning and into the early part of the afternoon. And what did they catch? "Nothing," grumbled Abraham ben Abraham. "Not a flipper, not a fin, not a thing," shouted at Sonny, trying to sound that little bit street. A habit which annoyed his father nearly as much as sons of Zebedee and cats. And speaking of cats, what had happened to Pat? The answer is quite simple. While everyone else was preparing their boats, Sonny managed to lure the cat closer and closer to him by producing more and more fish heads. And eventually he managed to lure the cat into the bag itself, where an even greater quantity of fish heads resided. I say resided, I actually mean lay there, dead and disjointed, without their bodies. So the cat was literally in the bag, on board the boat, chewing on fish heads. I know this seems improbable. All I can say is that it was a reasonably large bag and an unusually small cat, and that the fish heads were incredibly delicious. So Pat was willing to go along for the ride, so to speak, and did in fact end up going along for the ride. As it happens, the ride came to an abrupt end, within shouting distance of the sons of Zebedee. Shouting was what Abraham ben Abraham was inclined to do whenever he was near the brothers of Zebedee. But he was concerned that shouting on this occasion would give rise to the inevitable fisherman's question, "Caught anything yet?" And since the answer to that question had already been established as not a flipper, not a fin, not a thing, he didn't want to embarrass himself in front of his chief competitors. He needn't have worried. James and John had had no such qualms. They had never thought of Abraham ben Abraham as their chief competitor. In fact, they barely knew he existed. This would have brought no comfort to Abraham ben Abraham. What did bring him comfort, though, was when they shouted back, "No luck today, mate. Haven't caught a thing." At this point, something unusual happened. Abraham ben Abraham smiled. And Sonny was shocked, for that was the very first time he had ever seen a smile on his father's face. The fact that it was not a nice smile made little difference to the boy. The fact that the smile had arisen from the complete failure of two fellow fishermen to provide for their families that day was of little concern. Sonny had seen his father smile. In fact, so struck was he by the moment that he very nearly told Abraham ben Abraham about the cat. But just as he opened his mouth, another unusual thing happened. Jesus arrived in a boat with Simon, a friend of James and John. He told Simon where to cast his net. Simon did so and hauled in a great catch of fish. Then he called for the sons of Zebedee to help him drag it in, for it was too much for just one boat. And just as quickly as it had arrived, the smile disappeared from Abraham ben Abraham's face. Sonny watched it all amazed. And so he said, quite understandably, "That's unbelievable. That's incredible. That's a miracle." Which in fact it was. A point that was not lost on Abraham ben Abraham. "Flipping sons of Zebedee," he muttered. "Blinking divine intervention," he moaned. And cursing and grumbling, he set sail for home. Sonny kept his mouth shut all the way. But the cat, unaware of anything but the lights of fish heads, began to purr. The sound of that purr was masked by the washing of the waves against the boat, until, that is, the vessel bumped with a thump against the shore, and the bag rolled forward, and the purr turned into a noisy meow. "That's a cat," shouted Abraham ben Abraham. "A cat in your bag on my boat!" And before Sonny could move, his father grabbed the boy's arm with one hand, snatched the bag off the deck with the other, and held it in the air. Pat the cat squirmed and twisted and yowled. Sonny begged and pleaded. "It's been an awful day," sneered Abraham ben Abraham, "but now at least there's one thing that will make me happy." And he dragged the bag over the water and laughed the nastiest of nasty cat-drowning laughs. And then a third unusual thing happened. James and John and Simon and his brother Andrew all came walking by. "We're done with fishing," they announced. "We're following Jesus now." "And you holding that bag," shouted John. "Why don't you have our catch for the day?" Abraham ben Abraham turned and walked to the end of the boat, letting go of Sonny's arm and dropping the bag on the deck as he went. "What? What did you say?" he stammered. "You can have our fish," said John. "They're all yours, mate." And suddenly the smile was back, and fish, like numbers, indeed fish-shaped numbers, added themselves up in Abraham ben Abraham's brain. Fish upon fish upon fish upon fish upon profit. "Did you hear that, boy?" he shouted. "It is a miracle after all." And forgetting everything else, including the cat, he raced off to count his fish. But Sonny sat down and opened up the bag. He would not have been surprised if the cat was dead. He would not have been surprised if the cat had bolted. He was surprised, however, when somewhat miraculously the cat crept slowly out of the bag and rubbed itself up against his leg. So he did what you do when a cat does that. He reached out his hand and gave him a pat. So, apparently that's what happened to the fish. I don't think I would have liked Abraham ben Abraham very much. I'm not sure he deserved the fish, but that's probably another story. Thanks for listening. God bless you.